For a brief, brilliant moment in history, Pontiac was a styling and performance leader in American cars, fueling testosterone dreams and led by a charismatic individual who dared to challenge GM's stodgy hierarchy. In the 1960s, they made legends. However, for much of their history, Pontiac was little more than another platform-sharing, value-priced GM division. Once corporate engines became the norm, the brand struggled with its identity and with sales. Sadly, the wide-track division was having a minor resurgence when it was abruptly canceled. So welcome back to All Cars Y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and this is a far too brief history of Pontiac, the excitement division. To get to Pontiac, you've got to start with Oakland. Oakland was founded in 1907 by Edward Murphy, who built horse-drawn carriages under the Pontiac Buggy Company. His story is eerily similar to that of William C. Durant, who also made carriages before founding General Motors in 1908 as a holding company for his controlling interest in Buick. Durant later added Oldsmobile and Cadillac to GM, and in 1909 he bought Oakland, intending for it to be the value-priced brand for his lineup. The first model was the Oakland 4, and in 1913 the Oakland 6, and historically, Oakland and Pontiac wouldn't use another four-cylinder until 1961. Soon, Oakland was sharing platforms, bodywork, and engines with other GM divisions. The name Oakland came from the county in Michigan where it was based. The name Pontiac came from a Native American war chief named this, but commonly known as Pontiac. That name was used as the county seat and home to the factory, to where production was eventually moved. GM acquired Chevrolet in 1917, and Chevy quickly took its place as the value brand below Oakland. By the 1920s, GM's product ladder ran from price-leading Chevrolet upward through Oakland, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac. But by the mid-20s, pricing gaps had developed in this strategy. Gaps GM believed could be filled with new sub-brands. Legendary GM President Alfred P. Sloan introduced the companion makes to supplement existing divisions. These weren't entirely new brands, but sub-brands built within existing divisions, cheaper to produce and helpful for boosting sales, much like today's Prius family or Ford's Bronco lineup, individual but not separate. Pontiac debuted at the 1926 New York Auto Show as Oakland's companion make. In 1927, Cadillac added LaSalle, Oldsmobile added Viking, Buick added Marquette in 1921. Here's how the brands and their companion makes were slotted into GM's hierarchy. The Great Depression devastated sales, and Marquette was canceled just 1 year later in 1930, Viking in 1931, and LaSalle managed to survive until 1940 before being squeezed out between Buick and Cadillac. Pontiac, however, had a very different fate. The 1926 Pontiacs were short wheelbase light six models priced to compete with four-cylinder cars, but still above Chevrolet. Pontiac quickly began outselling Oakland with more than 75,000 units its first year, over 140,000 in 1927 and more than 200,000 in 1928. By 1931, the Depression claimed Oakland, leaving Pontiac as the survivor above Chevrolet. That year's Pontiac, the 627, used a 187 cubic inch straight six engine making 40 horsepower. In 1932, Pontiac introduced the Series 302 V8 with a 251 cubic inch and 85 horsepower. Oddly, they switched to a 223 cubic inch straight 8 making 77 horsepower in 1933, making Pontiac the least expensive straight 8 car on the market. Costs were controlled by sharing much of the Chevrolet master body, but Pontiac added a large chrome strip down the center of the hood, their famous silver streak. In 1935, Pontiac got the torpedo body design from LaSalle and the Cadillac Series 60 before it migrated down to Chevy. By 1937, all Pontiac models except the new station wagon used GM's all-steel B-body platform alongside Oldsmobile, LaSalle, and Buick. The six-cylinder grew to 223 cubic inch with 85 horsepower, while the straight 8 reached 249 cubic inches and 100 horsepower. For 1940 through 42, the Pontiac Torpedo was built in 3 different bodies, variously shared with other divisions, including Cadillac. The last pre-war Pontiac rolled off the line on February 2nd, 1942. For much of its early histories and into the 50s, Pontiacs were considered solid but not especially powerful or exciting. The straight 8 was cheaper to build but heavier and longer, limiting redline and compression at a time when V8s were becoming the hot ticket. This quiet, competent approach suited Pontiac's image at the time. After the war, Pontiacs were essentially 1942 models with the addition of the hydromatic automatic transmission in 1948. The first all-new Pontiacs arrived in 1949, including the new Chieftain, built on the GM A-body platform and replacing the Torpedo, the B-body Streamliners, and in 1950 they began offering a pillarless hardtop coupe, the Catalina, as a trim line of the Chieftain and later Star Chief. Chieftains offered 4 engines, 2 239 cubic inch 6s and 2 249 cubic inch 8s, with slightly different horsepower ratings from 90 to 106 horsepower. Early models even offered quirky options like a 7-tube radio, a tissue dispenser, and a Remington auto home shaver. In 1952, Pontiac discontinued the Streamliner and replaced it with models based on the GM A-body, and in 1953 offered new styling with one-piece windshield, panoramic rear window, and fins on a 2-inch longer wheelbase at 122 inches. In 1954, they added the Star Chief, an A-body stretched by 11 inches. In spite of these changes, Pontiacs still used the straight 8 when most of the rest of the industry had moved to V8, and by 54, sales were sinking. All new bodies and chassis arrived in 1955, along with the new 287 cubic inch Strato Streak V8, making 173 horsepower. 6-cylinder models were now phased out until GM's downsizing in 77, and the V8 continued in various displacements and powers until 1981. In 1957, Bunky Knudsen became Pontiac's general manager and brought the head engineers Pete Estes and John DeLorean over to begin reshaping the brand's image. They removed the silver streak from the 57 models just before release, abandoning a styling cue used since 1933, and introduced the Bonneville as a limited edition Star Chief convertible. Taking the name from a Pontiac concept car resembling a Corvette, it was loaded with every option, including Pontiac's first fuel-injected engine making north of 300 horsepower and intended to compete against Chrysler's 300C. It was expensive, more than the entry-level Cadillac Series 62, but it generated huge interest with few sales. The Bonneville became a separate model in 58 as a 2-door hardtop or convertible on a 122-inch wheelbase, and it was the pace car for the Indy 500. Now lower priced by removing equipment, it offered a 369 cubic inch version of the V8 with a 4-barrel carb and dual exhaust making 255 horsepower. The fuel injection was still an option, but at $500 or over $5,000 in today's money, it was rare and offered little benefit over the tri-power engine with 3 2-barrel carburetors making 300 horsepower. 1959 was a landmark year. Pontiac dropped its long-used Native American imagery and introduced the arrowhead emblem with a star in the center. Major styling changes arrived: more glass, twin tail fins, and lower hood profiles. Knudsen thought the bodies looked awkward on the 58 frame, so he ordered the track widened by about 5 inches. The result was the wide-track Pontiac. The lineup was simplified with the Bonneville at the top and 2- or 4-door sedan, the Catalina taking the place of the Chieftain and Super Chief in the lineup as the entry-level full-size option, the Star Chief in the Safari wagon. All cars used the Tempest 420, a 389 cubic inch V8 ranging from 215 to 315 horsepower, depending on transmission, with 2-barrel, 4-barrel, or tri-power, and also offering the Tempest 420E for improved fuel economy as a no-cost option, and the little talked-about air ride suspension. Motor Trend named the entire Pontiac lineup for its 1959 Car of the Year. The 1960 models were reskinned again, losing the tail fins and split grille. In 1961, the split grille returned with all new bodies and chassis for the full-size cars. GM, impressed by the Corvair's innovation, gave Pontiac and DeLorean the lead on a new compact car. The result was the Tempest, built on the corporate unibody Y-body platform alongside the Buick Special and Oldsmobile F85. The Tempest was one of the most innovative American cars of the decade. It had the Trophy 4 195 cubic inch 4-cylinder, essentially half of a 389 V8, and Pontiac's first 4-cylinder since 1913. it had a rear-mounted transaxle, giving nearly a 50-50 weight distribution. Four-wheel independent suspension with a rear swing axle that was similar to the Corvair's, with a flat floor and excellent interior space due to a flexible rope drive shaft, so there was no interior hump, although only the Pontiac did this. It won Motor Trend's 1961 Car of the Year. It was offered with Buick's 215 V8 in 1961 and 62, and late in 61 offered the Le Mans upscale version. The Buick engine was replaced in 63 with a new 326 V8 that was actually 336 cubic inches. By 1962, the Tempest's popularity helped Pontiac rise to third place in U.S. sales, a position it held until 1970. In 1962, Pontiac introduced the Grand Prix, a sporty coupe with bucket seats. After this success, GM of course redesigned the Tempest for 64 on the corporate intermediate body on-frame A-body platform, underpinning the Chevy Chevelle with a conventional drivetrain, but with a GTO performance option package for 64 and 65 with the 389 V8. The result was one of Pontiac's most famous cars, the GOAT, in coupe, hardtop, or convertible, and making 325 or 348 horsepower. Pontiac had forecast 5,000 sales. They sold over 32,000 that first year. In 1965, DeLorean was promoted to head of the division, and the entire Pontiac lineup once again earned Motor Trend's Car of the Year. In 66, the GTO was split from being an option on the Tempest Le Mans and became its own separate model. By the late 1960s, Pontiac was changing its styling almost yearly, and we're not going to try to cover each and every iteration, but two major models were about to arrive. In 1967, Pontiac introduced the Firebird, based on the Chevy Camaro and positioned as their answer to the Ford Mustang. And in 1969, they launched the all-new Grand Prix as an intermediate car. Sales of the previous coupe had been slow, and Pontiac couldn't afford to develop a replacement all on its own. DeLorean reached out to his former boss, Pete Estes, now at Chevrolet, and the two agreed to share development costs. Pontiac got a one-year exclusive, and Chevy would introduce the Monte Carlo the following year. The new Grand Prix was a smash hit, selling more than 112,000 units in 1969, over 4 times the number sold in 1968. That same year, DeLorean moved up to become Chevrolet's general manager. In 1968, GM had banned multiple carburetors, thus killing the tri-power option, but Pontiacs responded with ram air engines, adding cool air at the carburetor to help boost power. By 69, GTO sales were cooling, and to help sales, they responded with the Judge option package. In both hardtop and convertible, it came with a Hurst shifter, wider tires, rear spoiler, decals, and stripes on the paint. But the big news was under the hood. A 366 horsepower or a 370 horsepower version. Unfortunately, it was only a temporary band-aid, as 72,000 GTOs were sold in 69, a drop of 20%, and by 71, sales had collapsed to just 10,000 units. An interesting footnote from the 60s, GM directed both its research and development division and Pontiac to explore concepts for small urban cars. First, they developed a plug-in gas-electric hybrid called the XP883 with a fiberglass body that foretold the future Chevy Chevette styling. Better known was the Pontiac Banshee concept, the XP833. Inspired by the Corvair Monza GT concept car, the Banshee was a fiberglass-bodied 2-seat sporty car with a 230 cubic inch 6-cylinder making 165 horsepower proposed as the base engine. In mid-1965, funding was cut and the project died, primarily from fears of it cannibalizing sales from the Corvette. Further, Pontiac designed a mid-engined, aircraft-style, air-cooled 2-stroke radial engine concept called the X4. This is just a sampling of the innovation and sporty thinking going on at Pontiac in their own unique R&D areas. The real decline of the performance division began in 1971. GM issued a corporate edict that all engines must be capable of running on unleaded gasoline. Compression ratios dropped, performance fell, and fuel economy suffered. The big, powerful engines of the 1960s were gone. Pontiac tried to reposition itself against the more luxurious Buicks and Oldsmobiles. They introduced the Ventura 2 in 1971. The GTO became a subseries of the Le Mans again in 1972, and the Tempest line was dropped entirely. In 1973, Pontiac restyled the Grand Prix, Le Mans, and Ventura, and introduced the Grand Am as part of the Le Mans lineup, combining what was to be the next generation GTO but adding more luxury to it. Famously, they began using the Firebird Trans Am's hood decal, harkening back to the Pontiac's Native American heritage. New emissions and safety standards meant power dropped again. By 1975, 2 of the 3 versions of the 455 cubic inch engine were gone, and the last one disappeared after 76. Slow sales of the Grand Am led to its first cancellation. Bowing to market pressure for fuel economy, they added a subcompact variant of the Vega called the Astra in 1975, and in 76 introduced the Sunbird, also based on the Vega. For 1977, GM began downsizing its full-size cars, including Pontiac's B-bodies. The increasingly similarly styled across GM divisions cheapened Pontiac's image. They also introduced the compact Phoenix as an upscale version of the Ventura, only for it to replace the Ventura in the lineup. Based on the rear-wheel drive X-body platform, it used the new 151 cubic inch Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine, making 85 horsepower. Also used in the Astra and the Sunbird, it replaced the Vega's troublesome aluminum block, and variations would remain in use well into the early 1990s. The Grand Am reappeared for the 1978 model year based on the Grand Prix G platform. Well equipped, including radial tires and Pontiac's 301 cubic inch V8 making 140 horsepower, it only lasted until 1980 when slow sales once again killed it. The Firebird achieved its Smokey and the Bandit fame during this era, and it also starred in the Rockford Files. But through the 70s and 80s, Pontiac leaned heavily on luxury, safety, and economy, not excitement. Station wagons proliferated, padded vinyl roofs returned, and wire wheel covers made a comeback for the first time since the 1930s. The 1980s opened with a front-wheel drive thud in the form of the Phoenix, essentially a Pontiac-badged version of the notoriously troublesome Chevy Citation. In 1982, the Firebird received a major redesign, and Knight Rider helped cement it as a pop culture icon. And then came the 1984 Fiero, a mid-engine 2-seat coupe. The Fiero history got its own video. It began as a bit of a lie to GM management about what the Pontiac was trying to achieve. It had a low-rent interior and some early reliability issues, but it became famous and helped Pontiac achieve its first sales increase in 4 years. For the 1982 model year, Pontiac introduced the 6000, based on the front-wheel drive A-body Chevrolet Celebrity with a heavily revised version of the Iron Duke, now called the Tech 4, making 90 horsepower, an optional 173 cubic inch V6 making 112 horsepower, or a 263 cubic inch Oldsmobile diesel V6 making 85 horsepower. They then added the 6000 STE Sport model in 1983 to compete with European sedans. That STE was named to Car and Driver's 10 Best 3 times between 83 and 85, and in 84, Road and Track called it one of the top 12 enthusiast cars, and by 84, the 6000 was Pontiac's best seller with over 122,000 units sold. However, for all of its success, it was also an embarrassment for GM, as a 1983 cover of Fortune magazine highlighted how GM's badge engineering created nearly identical cars across their different marks. Full-size buyers still wanted full-size Pontiac, so for 83, the division imported the Cadillac Parisienne, which was essentially a trimmed-up Chevy Caprice. It sold well, but further damaged Pontiac's brand identity. For 1985, the Grand Am returned, this time as a compact car based on the N-body platform shared with the Olds Calais and Buick Somerset, and replacing the unpopular Phoenix in the lineup. This became one of Pontiac's most popular cars through 3 generations until ultimately it was canceled in 2005 in preparation for the G6. For the 88 model year, the Grand Prix migrated to the front-wheel drive W-body platform shared with the Lumina, Oldsmobile Cutlass, Buick Regal, and others, initially continuing as a 2-door only. By 88, Pontiac was once again the number 3 domestic brand, and its median buyer age had dropped from 46 in 1981 down to 38. But the cumulative effects of platform sharing and badge engineering were only beginning, and they began their long, slow slide to irrelevance. In 1990, Pontiac got its first minivan, the Transport. The Grand Prix gained its first four-door model, replacing the 6000 in the lineup, as well as adding a special touring edition, the STE model, without all-wheel drive, but an available turbocharged 3.1-liter V6. The Bonneville had switched to the front-wheel drive H-body platform in '87 and made Car and Driver's 10 Best list that year, and was now redesigned for '92, as well as an all-new Firebird in 1993. The Sunbird was replaced by the Sunfire, and the Grand Prix was redesigned again in 1997 with the Wider is Better campaign, a callback to the wide track era. There were countless revisions, styling updates, and engine changes, but most were honestly forgettable, and sales tell the story. Pontiac sold over 800,000 units in 1989. By 1997, that number had fallen to about 616,000, and that was actually an improvement from the mid-500,000 range earlier that decade. That 616,000 figure would be Pontiac's last high point. In 2000, the Bonneville received a major redesign on the G-body platform shared with the Oldsmobile Aurora and Buick LeSabre. In 2001, Pontiac unleashed the Aztek, a vehicle that in many ways encapsulated everything that had gone wrong at GM. There was smart thinking buried in the design, but platform sharing, cost-cutting, management interference, and questionable styling turned what should have been a home run into a punchline. In 2003, they introduced the Vibe, a Toyota-based compact wagon. It was a good car, just not an exciting one. In 2004, Pontiac revived the GTO, a rebadged version of the Australian Holden Monaro. Enthusiasts had begged for it after glowing reviews in magazines like Car and Driver. With Bob Lutz's support, it finally happened. But GM management resisted, the culture dragged its feet, and by the time the car arrived in 2004, the 2001 design already looked dated. The price had ballooned from about $25,000 to nearly $34,000. It performed brilliantly. LS1 power at 350 horsepower and then LS2 at 400 horsepower, but sales lagged. Only about 40,000 were sold over 3 years. More life came in 2006 with the Solstice, a 2.4-liter, 177 horsepower roadster that became a modest hit. Pontiac sold just over 65,000 of them between 2006 and 2010, low volume, but still far more than the GTO. Oldsmobile was canceled in 2004 and Pontiac reshuffled its lineup. The Grand Am became the G6, a handsome car but still a corporate platform with corporate engines. The Bonneville was canceled after nearly 50 years. The Aztek quietly disappeared, replaced by the Torrent, a rebadged Chevy Equinox. The Sunfire was discontinued in 2005 and replaced by the G5, oddly only offered as a coupe. In 2008, Pontiac introduced the G8, another Holden import. It was widely praised as a poor man's BMW M5 for its performance at a much lower price. The G8 GXP, with its 6.2-liter V8 making 415 horsepower, became the most powerful production Pontiac ever built and one of the best driving Pontiacs of all time. It was a spectacular final act. In spite of some fresh styling direction and new naming conventions, by 2008, sales fell to 267,000 in the U.S. In December of 2008, GM was approaching bankruptcy and announced it was considering eliminating several brands while seeking a $25 billion loan from the government. In February 2009, GM proposed selling or eliminating Saturn and Hummer and selling Saab. Pontiac was teased as surviving as a niche, youth-oriented performance brand, but no real plan existed. In April, GM confirmed Pontiac would be eliminated, keeping Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac, and Buick in the lineup. Pontiac wound down by 2010. In 2009, Michigan dealer Jim Waldron attempted to buy the Pontiac brand outright. He had financing lined up to purchase the name and several plants to continue building cars, and GM refused, saying that Pontiac was not for sale. GM still owns the trademark today, and there's always a little chatter among enthusiasts that Pontiac might return someday. Fittingly, the last Pontiac ever built was a white four-door G6 sedan, a rental car. A quiet ending for the excitement division. Our relationship with car brands tends to be deeply personal, and I've heard from a lot of you who loved and miss Pontiac. And if you do, I get it. I totally do. But for most of my life, Pontiac has been just another GM division filled with generic rental car quality cars. Yes, there were some very high points in there, like the 6000 XTE, and I've always kind of enjoyed the Grand Am myself. Late the G8, the Pontiac Solstice, there was some good stuff in there, but for the most part, the excitement division was really just marketing speak. I've seen comments claiming that Pontiac was just on the verge of having a resurgence with the Holden cars right when they were canceled, but I don't really see it that way, and sales data for the division don't back it up. Yes, the Aztec proved there was some individual thinking going on over at Pontiac, along with those last cars that were pretty good quality and pretty good drivers, but that same corporate culture that strangled Pontiac from the 70s on still existed. And let's face it, the G6 was a rental car special, the G5 was available in two-door only, and that was only after dealers begged for something to sell in that segment. Any resurgence, I believe, was too little and too late. And let's face a really harsh truth. You can make a Buick sporty, and you can make a Chevrolet sporty. So where does that leave Pontiac if you're using the same platforms and engines other than styling? That was the curse of Pontiac. We still hear some chatter online that maybe Pontiac will come back, or fake ads in magazines that suggest Pontiac is going to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. But so far, GM has tamped down all of those rumors. But yet, hope exists because they continue to hold on to that name, to that trademark. Is there a place for it in the future? Maybe. But I don't think it'll be in my lifetime. Thanks so much for being here, and a special thanks to my patrons who make videos like this totally possible. Please be sure to check out my other channel, All Cars Reacts, where I do reaction videos, news opinions, and generally vlog about the state of the automotive industry. And if you like this video, be sure to check out this one right here. I bet you'll love it as well. Thank you so much for spending just a few minutes with me here today.